Today we're going to be covering a lot of territory, and we welcome everybody for joining us. Just want to cover a couple of logistical issues before I get in and present all the speakers and what they're going to be covering today. We are offering CPE credit today, so if you have asked to receive CPE, or frankly, if you haven't, but you're still interested in getting it, please make sure that you answer the poll questions that will be conducted at 2 different points during the session today. And if you have any kind of problems with any technical issues, please email us at support, SUPPORT, @xbrl.us, and we'll do our best to get you back online. All right, with that, I'm going to move to our next slide. All right, let's just talk a little bit about what we're going to be discussing today. We're going to start off with Stephanie Leiser. Stephanie is Fiscal Health Project Lead at the Center for Local, State, and Urban Policy, CLOSUP, University of Michigan's Ford School of Public Policy. Stephanie is going to be covering the Financial Data Transparency Act and its impact on local governments. She'll also talk a little bit more about why the University of Michigan got involved in this initiative. Next, we'll have Stephanie will be leading a discussion with Robert Wiggin. Robert is Chief Financial Officer at the City of Flint, Michigan, and they're going to be talking a little bit about the City of Flint's involvement in the pilot program. We'll then take a couple of CPE questions and then turn it over to Campbell Pry, President and CEO of XBRL US, who will cover open data standards, the annual comprehensive financial reporting taxonomy, and how it will work for government entities. And then finally, we're going to turn to Mark Jaffe. Mark is a policy analyst at the Cato Institute. Mark is going to provide a demonstration of which is one of many different tools that are available to prepare financial statements in machine readable format in compliance with the FDTA. And then we'll take a couple of CPE questions, and then we'll go to an open Q&A. If you do have questions as we go through the program, please feel free to post a question in the Q&A box that you'll see, that you should see on your console. And I actually did just receive a question, and will the recording be made available? Absolutely. We always post our recordings, and we will be posting the slides as well. So with that, I want to just go ahead and dive right into our presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie Leiser.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to see everyone this afternoon. Or I guess maybe it's not afternoon for everybody, is it? No, it is. I'm Stephanie Leiser. I'm on the faculty of the Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan. And as Michelle said, I lead the project here at the Center for Local, State, and Urban Policy on local government fiscal health and financial data standards. So I want to start by giving you a brief overview of the FDTA, what's in it, what it means for local governments, and then step back a little bit and talk about the project I've been working on. So as probably most of you know already, this was signed into law late last year as part of the Defense Authorization Spending Bill, appropriately enough. And what it does is a number of things, and specifically with regard to local government and state and local governments, it regulates the type of information, or not the type of information, but how the information is coming into various regulatory agencies. So this includes SEC in particular, which has been tasked with implementing the new standards with municipal securities. So can we go to the next slide, please? So this requires these regulatory agencies to adopt data standards. As many of you are probably familiar with, data standards have to do with how the data are communicated. They include common identifiers to identify who's reporting information. The standards are required to be open and non-proprietary. That means that anyone can use them. There's royalty associated with it. The data have to come in able to be searchable and machine readable. That means that they're in a digital format and that you can perhaps log onto a website or log into a database and just find the data that you need rather than pouring through PDF documents, as we'll talk more about in a minute. It requires the standards to be developed and maintained by voluntary standards consensus bodies. And it requires the data standards to be consistent with applicable accounting and reporting principles. So GAAP, promulgations from GASB, that sort of thing. So there's nothing different about the data itself and the meaning of the data and the definition of the data. It's just the format that will be reported to these agencies is what's changing with regard to this legislation. In terms of the timing, so 18 months after the enactment of the bill, so roughly 18 months, a little less than 18 months from now, the agencies that are implementing the bill will issue proposed rules. And at that point, they'll take public comment and do some round of revisions. 2 years after that, they will jointly promulgate the final rules for the data standards. And then no later than 2 years after that is the official start of establishing the data standards and when they take effect. So we're looking at, a few years rollout period. And I think there's a lot still to be seen on a lot of the details about who will be affected and when they will be affected. But I think we'll start having those conversations and getting some more of the details fairly soon. So go ahead to the next slide. Impact on local governments specifically will be in, like I said, not what sort of data they're going to have to be reporting, but in what format. So specifically in this act, this will affect governments that are reporting to the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, MSRB. So that means they're participating in the bond markets and sending their continuing disclosures and their all of their information to the EMA system, which then posts it online for people market participants to view. So who is affected by this? And there may be other local governments that could be affected because of the GREAT Act. And I think there's still some open questions about what that will ultimately mean. But again, just to reiterate, there's no change in what governments are going to be required to disclose. There's language in the legislation specifically saying there's no new disclosure requirements. It's just affecting the format of disclosure to be in these new open data standards. So please go ahead to the next slide. Before we get to technically what this looks like, I want to just spend a couple of minutes sort of zooming out and talking about why we, as the University of Michigan Center for Local, State, and Urban Policy, got involved in developing these data standards. Go ahead to the next slide. So we've been working on this for a few years now, and really, we're looking at it in a much broader scope than just the FDTA, municipal governments that are reporting to the MSRB for purposes of bond market. And we have a much bigger perspective on the value of open data standards and the costs and benefits of using them for governments. So we think, the core of this really comes down to the gold standard for the data. What we're really trying to get at are these data that are like locked up in PDF documents. The audited comprehensive financial report is our main example of this, is that these are generated regularly by many local governments, but their format that they're delivered in is really not conducive to being able to use and do data analysis. So if you want to do data analysis, you have to manually extract the data. And I'm sure many of the people on this call have spent a lot of time, including myself, doing this sort of work. It's labor intensive, expensive, prone to error. So, typos and that sort of thing. And it's duplicative. If you have data from your audit and you're entering it into multiple different reporting requirements, you're just copying and pasting the same things over and over again. So it's not really the most efficient way to do reporting. And then having that in that PDF format just really limits the accessibility of the data for all stakeholders. So not just us in the research community, but for regulators, for policymakers, for the general public who may want to access and use the data. Next slide. So like I said, we've been thinking about this for a number of years, and we have really tried to take a holistic view on who are the stakeholders in this process. So we think about who are the ones who generate and report the data, and this would be the governments themselves, and then the professionals who help them generate their data. So CPAs and other consultants who are doing all the front end work to generate the data, make all the calculations, and creating the audit and the other documents. And then on the other end, we have the data users who are really quite a broad variety of stakeholders. So we have everyone from the government managers themselves, trying to understand what's in their data and how to use it to inform their decision making. Other direct government stakeholders, employees and retirees, policymakers and regulators are often looking at this data to try to understand government fiscal health and what could improve it, and oversight responsibilities. Obviously, investors are looking at this, and this is, you know, particularly relevant to this legislation, the FDTA that's passed. And then, like I said, us in the broader research community, just sort of interested in local government fiscal health and media in general public. So we're really trying to think about the perspectives of all of these different stakeholders in thinking about what is the future of this work and this project. So go ahead and advance the slide. So our goal has been basically a fully digital audited comprehensive financial report. And we think that moving towards adopting these data standards, not just for, like I said, reporting to the MSRB or to whatever, but doing it in a more comprehensive basis will enhance the reliability and usability of data for all stakeholders. We think it can streamline reporting for governments, because if you're producing this data one time and it's, you know, in a reliable and useful format, then you can share that, you know, instantly with whoever you need to report it to. So we think there's a lot of time savings potentially in the long run on this. And ultimately, our goal is around transparency and good government and getting the data that we need to really improve our understanding of government fiscal health. Go ahead to the next slide. So, like I said, we've been working on this project for a couple of years now. We've gotten grants from the Mott Foundation here in Michigan, and also an internal grant from the University of Michigan Center for Academic Innovation. We've used that money to work with our colleagues at XBRL to create a draft of open data standard that captures the audited comprehensive financial report, the ACFRS. And so it captures most of the main statements, the government-wide statement of net position and governmental funds statements, as well as data on 4 different footnotes on debt, capital assets, pension, and OPEB, and also layers in some Michigan-specific reporting elements as well. And we'll talk about how other state-specific reporting elements can be incorporated in something like this too. We've run a few pilots, and you'll meet in a few minutes one of my colleagues from the city of Flint. We've also run a couple pilots in some smaller local governments here in Michigan, just to sort of get a range of different sizes and different capacities, and think about how this can work not just in larger cities, but in smaller communities as well. We've also been working with a group associated with our Michigan Department of Treasury, which is tasked with oversight of local government fiscal health. They developed a working group to explore the feasibility of replacing their existing reporting systems, reporting requirements, with XBRL-based reporting. So that work is ongoing as well. And go ahead to the next slide. So at this point, I just want to introduce a colleague of mine. We've been working on a pilot project. His name is Rob Whittigan. He is the Chief Financial Officer in the city of Flint. Rob, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, thank you for having me on this webinar, and thanks for all who were able to join. As Stephanie said, my name's Rob Whittigan. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for Flint, Michigan. Prior to that, I was same role for the city of Lansing, Michigan. And then prior to that, I worked for Michigan Department of Treasury.
Thanks, Rob. So I just have a few questions for you, if you wouldn't mind. What initially sparked your interest to participate in the pilot project?
Yeah, so a former colleague of mine at the Michigan Department of Treasury and good friend reached out to me when I first started at the city of Flint, and they stated that someone from the University of Michigan is heading up a project using XBRL, which they've been excited for years now. And they went on to explain that the project tags PDF audit reports that can be used to extract data, and that's quite revolutionary and represents a quantum leap in financial reporting from what we currently do. So I paused there from reading their email and thought, it's an audit. How exciting can it get? But if they said if it was cool, I better check it out. So I did, and I'd have to agree that it truly is, in my opinion, a quantum leap in financial reporting. And then ever since then, I've been working with University of Michigan, XBRL, and Workiva to accomplish and promote this pilot project.
That's great. So, and thanks for your participation. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
In what ways do you hope that adopting these data standards will benefit the city of Flint specifically, and then local governments more generally?
Well, I'll start with local government more generally. Let's face it, our annual audits do provide essential information for understanding local fiscal health. But the data in these reports are in PDF documents, and which severely limit their accessibility and usefulness for many stakeholders, especially for those not trained in government accounting. So this is about more than just reporting and compliance. It's really about getting the most out of our data to improve decision making and tell our story. So I mean, if you're asking me, it's about time that we modernize and digitize municipal financial reporting, especially if it brings about transparency and better governance in the end. And hopefully in the end, that's what we get out of the project. As to how adopting data standards will benefit Flint specifically, we hope that, like with all local governments, we can communicate better with our philanthropic partners and other community stakeholders. Flint is a city that's on a path from crisis to recovery, and part of that path includes a strong partnership with our philanthropic, state, and community partners. So the more transparent we are with our financial data, the more we build trust, and the stronger these partnerships can be. And transparency allows organizations to identify future needs of the city, even before we approach them with an ask.
Yeah, thanks. So you've had you've spent some time participating in this pilot and kind of gone through the process. What do you think is important for other local officials to know about what it means to adopt data standards in their communities?
I mean, look, I think it's important that getting into it, the ultimate goal, and that's, in my opinion, transparency and better governance. But moreover, in theory, this will save local officials a lot of time when it comes to reporting, annual reporting requirements to the state and federal governments. For example, here in Michigan, I'll go through a quick list of reports we have to submit. So CVTRS report F65, our Public Act 202 Form 5572, which is pension OPEB reporting, Michigan Department of Transportation Act 51 report, continuing disclosures, qualifying statements, and the list continues. And I know other states have their own versions of reporting requirements, but in the end, all or most of these reports with this data should be able to be automatically generated with modernized machine readable reporting. So this will save us a lot of time, and having the data for other local governments in an open standard format would also help us benchmark against our peers.
So in general, from a local government's point of view, what issues or perspectives do you think it's important to take into account as we continue along implementing this law and other laws, or not other laws, other policies, other initiatives around data standards for local government?
Well, as we work through this project, the most significant issue I see is time. So it takes time to ensure the initial data upload is inputted accurately and verified. So local governments would really benefit from education and resources around the initial implementation phase. But with that in mind, it's a one-time lift. So from what I'm seeing, once this data is in there and mapped, it's just a simple upload the next year and so on. Moreover, if I may suggest, planning is critical. So when you sit down with your auditors, or if you're issuing a new RFP for auditing services, adding data standards to the scope of work is important. For example, for a fee, many auditors now generate F-65 reports for us here in Michigan. So when working with your auditor, ask if they're willing to enter this data into an XBRL program, and that would save a lot of upfront time. Lastly, rather than just focusing on reporting and compliance with the new FTTA, we really have to keep the bigger picture in mind. And this change would really be revolutionary in bringing high quality, highly detailed data out into the open and making it available for anyone. So I was, as I mentioned, I was on the other side of the table when I worked for Michigan Department of Treasury, and part of my training was to analyze local audit reports, present the data, and then present the data to internal leadership. So with the technology available, there was no easy way to pull crucial data from the PDF reports just besides sitting and reading through it and pulling it out. So it seems that these proposed data standards would allow states, researchers, reporters, or really anyone to pull vital financial data points with just the hit of a button.
That's great. Well, again, thanks so much for participating today, Rob. We really appreciate your partnership on this project and look forward to continuing to work with you on it. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Michelle.
Stephanie and Robert, thank you very much. That was really helpful. We're going to take a couple of CPE questions now. So for those of you, again, who want to get CPE, please make sure that you take a look. And I'm going to launch our first poll. Okay, so you should be able to see this here. The question is, which of the following agencies are included in the FDTA legislation? Is it the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, U.S. Census, or the Office of Management and Budget? So just take a look at that and answer which of the agencies you think is included in the FDTA legislation. Okay, we're just going to take another 15 seconds or so for that one. And we have been getting a lot of questions in. Thank you for sending those. Some of them we're trying to respond to on the fly, but we'll also take questions and try to respond to those at the end. Okay, so we're going to close down this poll. And just for those of you wondering what the answer is, it's the SEC. The SEC is part of the FDTA. All right, so we're going to go on to the next poll question here. When will data standards established take effect? Is it 2 years after enactment of the FDTA? Is it 2 years after final rules are promulgated, or is it 18 months after enactment of the FDTA? Okay, just another 5 seconds or so here. And I'm going to close down the poll. And the correct answer is 2 years after the final rules are promulgated. So with that, we're going to close down that poll, and we're going to turn it over now to Campbell Pride, President and CEO of XBRL US, to tell us a little bit more about data standards.
Thank you, Michelle. So just to kick off, we've been talking about what the Close-Up project has been doing, but we thought it'd be useful to give some background on what data standards are and why they're important in this context. So data standards are a way to improve the efficiency of creating reports, and allows the automation of creation of data reports, but also the use and the extraction of that data. And like any data standard or any standard, it allows economies of scale and allows efficiency and effectiveness in processes. And we've seen that in many realms across the world, particularly in the United States, as data standards in general have changed a lot of spheres, be it shipping containers to barcodes, to standardization of railway tracks at the turn of the century. So we know there's a lot of efficiency that can be gained by standardization, and in many areas, particularly in the world of data, there are a number of standards that already exist, but in the world of financial reporting, that data standardization hasn't really happened until the last 10 years. And so one of the reasons for going down this path is to try and take advantage of many of the efficiencies and gains we've achieved from data standardization. So, but when we're talking about data standards, just to be clear, we're not talking about standards like the GASB or FASB. They in themselves are standards. They're standards around how the data is actually created and prepared, whereas the data standards we're talking about today is how that data, once it's created, is packaged and distributed in a way that's understandable by machines. So one of the concerns that have been expressed in the past has been, is this going to change the way that I record? Is this going to change the way I should be capturing information? There's no intention to change that. The data standards really are about a standardized way of capturing information that has already been promulgated from standard setters such as the GASB. And data standards can be created to adapt to all different types of governments. One of the other concerns is, in the past, people see standardizing data as putting data into a template. And XBRL particularly tries to get around that paradigm by basically creating what's called a taxonomy, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But it's really defining what the data is, defining the data model, defining how all the different data relates to each other. So when someone says to you a taxonomy, a taxonomy for GASB, what that really means is we're taking all of the information that's in those standards and then putting them into a format which makes them readable by a computer system. So today, many of you may be aware the GASB has something called the codification, which is basically you can go there and then you can look at what are all the accounting standards that have been published. But you got to search for it. You got to search for a reference. You got to look it up. You got to know what you're looking for, and it doesn't necessarily show the relationships between the different standards. If you're going to look up something about cash, it may be sprinkled all over the codification. So when that's put into a taxonomy, or that information is put in a taxonomy, all of the information that's relevant is codified in a standardized way, and all the information that relates to each other can be related to each other. So that means that you can query the taxonomy to understand what the accounting standards are, but not only humans can do that, but machines can do that as well. And in addition, data standards because everything's standardized, it allows many options for reporting. It means that if you can walk away from having a world where you've got niche software to deal with specific reporting requirements. So you can basically say, if I need to do a report, and we've seen this in other areas for, let's say, FERC reporting, for example, where government utilities would, there were specific software vendors who would just support that marketplace. And then other software vendors or other service providers can come into that marketplace and provide their service because they know what the standard is, they know how it works, they know no matter what the domain knowledge is, they can query that from the taxonomy that's been published. So the overall goal of that is to drive down the cost of being able to process this data, and it means that the market for service providers can be greatly expanded. And you'll see a little bit later, we can just take standard off-the-shelf tools and use them for presenting data that's being prepared by state and local government, and the same tools could be used for corporations or used for anyone else who's using XBRL data. So in the US today, and I briefly mentioned this, there are a number of XBRL implementations. The FDIC has implemented XBRL for bank reporting. So over 6,000 banks report in XBRL every quarter, their data to the FDIC. And that's very detailed data right down to the derivative positions and everything else. So it's very detailed, very specific information. The utilities industry use it as well. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission collects data from utilities, electric utilities, as well as gas pipelines and oil pipelines. So that data is currently reported in XBRL format. And once again, that reporting is, basically takes very, very detailed information that's being collected now in a standardized format. And then public companies and investment management companies are also reporting in an XBRL format to the Securities and Exchange Commission using XBRL. And that covers basically all of their financial statement information and note information that's provided as part of their regular reports, like a 10K or a 10Q. And there's a broad range of companies supporting filers in this effort, and because it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's an open standard and it's free, and anyone can adopt it. It means we get a broad range of software providers who can facilitate the exchange of this data. And so you don't have, if you're in one market supporting XBRL, it's very easy to support another market where XBRL filing is required. Then that makes the market you can get a much larger market because you're using a standard, which drives down the cost for everyone involved. All right. So what this graph is showing here is really, it's we're kind of overlaying what happens with something like the SEC today. This is the model the SEC uses, but we would imagine government bodies and local government would use the same approach for their ACFAs. So a taxonomy would be published, and who publishes that? The SEC obviously still has to decide that, but it would probably be sensible that GASB is doing that. And then there is also the local governments and states are also probably involved in that process to make sure that the standards basically encapsulate all the data that needs to be reported across the United States. And then governments would prepare that data in conformance with the taxonomy standards and then publish those as XBRL documents, and then make typically probably through the MSRB, but they could be also distributed directly to people who want that data as well. So there's a broad range of participants who want it, but anyone taking that data would be in a standard format. They know how they use it, and they can further process that data and put it into an electronic format that they prefer to use and use for analysis, be it spreadsheets or quantitative and analytic tools, whatever it may be. So this is the taxonomy itself. This was we were talking about the taxonomy earlier on in the presentation, and what is it? So basically you can think of a taxonomy as like a bunch of Lego blocks that you can put together in different pieces and then take the bits that you need. And so we've structured the ACFA taxonomy in that using that approach. So you can see here, this is kind of an abstracted view of the taxonomy, but it's got a bunch of different pieces that you can pull and use. So you can see statements for community college district. We've got a statement of net position, revenues, expenses, changes in fund net position, statement of cash flows. These are things that you could take and use if you're a community college. There's the general purpose statements. Now, underneath of these, so that you may have cash, which is used in a number of these statements, like the cash flow, the statement of net position, the proprietary funds statement of net position. So there's shared components, and they're kind of built up to represent different reports different report or statements in a report that you would see. So basically, you can add different components to the taxonomy over time, which you can use basically core elements and share those amongst different reports. This means that you can think of it as like building blocks. If you're building a building, you just don't go and buy the whole building. You buy all the pieces and you can assemble it any way you want. And so then this means that you can have it allows you to be able to report for entities which can be quite significantly different from other entities. And many governments obviously are going to have quite a broad range of economic activity they're undertaking. So we want to be able to capture basically data, all the different types of data that they're going to be reporting. We've also put in here state-specific requirements for the pilot for Michigan. We also include in the taxonomy some of their specific forms that are used by Treasury, like the F-65. So what you could do if you created, for example, an XBRL, you created your data in XBRL, you could generate, even though you provided all the data for the statement of net position, statement of activities, you could then use that same data to generate the form F-65. Whereas today they have to go and create, the controllers would have to go and create two different reports, but they've effectively got exactly the same data in it. So it allows the automation of those processes so that if you're creating multiple data in multiple places, you can streamline that. So this is just, plans. So if we're going to, just expand that taxonomy out, we can add different things on top of it, additional special districts, additional states. One of the things we did in Michigan, we included the chart of accounts in the taxonomy. So if you're in Michigan and you know your chart of account number, you can look that up in the taxonomy. It'll tell you what the equivalent XBRL element is. But there's no reason that can't be done for every state. And if that's, a human could look it up, but a machine could use it as well. If you had data with the chart of account number on it, you could automatically turn that into an XBRL document as well. So a lot of this is the more information we capture in the taxonomy, the more that it can be used to automate processes which are currently done manually. Okay, so just this taxonomy is available on the XBRL website in a viewer. This is a taxonomy viewer tool that you can go and have a look at. And we just put up some screenshots here just so you can kind of see, kind of conceptualize what's going on. So here's a statement of net position, and you can see there's a bunch of lines on the left, and these basically represent different sections of a balance sheet or a statement of net position. And then you can see here we're highlighting cash and cash equivalents, and there's a bunch of information in the taxonomy which tells you what that means. It tells you, it's a monetary item, it's measured at a point in time, it's got some definitions, and it's also got different labels, what it might be called if it appears in different places or in different economic entities. So you can define that, and you can also define the references. And you can see here there's a reference to GASB, but there may be references also to the chart of accounts for each specific state as well. It also defines in there the taxonomy how those elements relate to each other, what reports they appear in. So there's a lot of information in the taxonomy, and if you want to go and have a look at that, you can on our website. In addition, here is what the actual data created in conformance with that taxonomy looks like. So this is Flint's financial statements, and you can see here's their net position, and here's the cash and cash equivalents element here as well. So this is represented in a format called inline XBRL, and this is just showing the traditional statement. Anything shown in red is basically, it means it has an equivalent XBRL value associated with it, so you can identify what it is. And this is at the top, you see there's a blue bar. This is represented in in what's called an XBRL viewer. This particular viewer was created by the SEC. They made it open source, but because it's a standard, anyone can take that viewer and they can use it. So something which was originally intended for corporate disclosure can also be used for government disclosure or any other disclosure, as long as they're reporting that data in an XBRL format. So, it just kind of give you the advantage of standardizing this data. So the ACFA taxonomy itself, we really designed it to be flexible and to support many different state-specific requirements. And it's, as I mentioned earlier, we incorporated the chart of accounts, and that could be done for every single state if need be. So it's important that obviously that everyone should be, once the SEC decides how they're going to define these standards, and chances, it would be reasonable to do that in XBRL. The state should get involved, and they should make sure that they provide feedback on that taxonomy. And that's kind of the process that has been followed today for FASB, so we wouldn't expect that to change. And it needs to be flexible, obviously, to support different types of governments, general purpose, special districts. And it's important that we try and make this as flexible as possible. And that's what we've tried to do in the design of the taxonomy. Everyone understands there's unique line items, and government activities can, cover a broad range of activities. And so just to reiterate again, is that all of this technology is based on an open, non-proprietary standard. It's widely used around the world. It's used in over 200 implementations. So there's a lot of tools and support behind this. So this is something which which is something which can basically, we believe can support a lot of the varied government reporting requirements in a lot more comprehensive way than anything else can at the moment. Just some of the things about, obviously we've received a lot of questions about how would I go about putting this data in an XBRL into an XBRL standard. So obviously there's a number of different, well, one would hope there was a number of different choices, and there are. So we've been asked, does this mean I have to, replace all my accounting systems? What's the implication for me as a state and local government? I think one of the things is to remember there are a number of different options, and it really depends on your situation. And many of you are going to be in different stages. Some of you may be implementing computer systems today, or planning to implement them in the future, or you've already just implemented a system. What does that mean for you? And so there's a number of different options. There's like full service and preparation reporting applications. What this would mean, let's say you've got an ERP system. Many ERP systems already have XBRL built in so that they can produce XBRL straight out of the ERP system. There are disclosure management systems which allow you to basically extract data from your ERP system and then manage the whole reporting framework and the report, and then basically incorporate XBRL as part of that and be able to publish it. And then there are spreadsheet-based applications where you could enter this data into a spreadsheet and generate it out of a spreadsheet if you wanted to, if you're taking the generating from a spreadsheet yourself, or you could even just take your final PDF, continue to create that, and then give that to a third party who then takes it and puts it into an XBRL format. So there's a number of different options, and the prices of all those different options can vary, and a lot of those will have a lot more advantages than just putting the data into an XBRL format. So, and just to give you an idea on what some of these costs are, when we looked at the costs for corporates a few years ago, and the average cost was for 4 filings to the SEC a year was like $5,500. But for software, we know the cost to get software to put it into an XBRL format can go as low as $500. And then, you can also ask, people will charge basically on a page basis. They'll charge a given amount. So it's worth asking different people how much it's going to cost. But we know, for small entities, the cost is, it shouldn't be more than, if you can see here for SEC signing at $5,500, that's for 4 filings. The cost can be, relatively small. And then obviously we've seen people say, oh, okay, I'm just going to build the software myself. It's not that difficult. And if you've got like an IT group, in some cases, we've seen people do that as well. But since it's open, there's nothing to stop you from doing that. So you do have a large number of choices. So with that, I'm going to hand it over. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to hand it over to Mark Joffe, and he's going to go through a demonstration of this.
Thanks, Campbell. I'm going to show you a video demonstration that I put together of a tool that allows a small government to easily file inline XBRL. I figured, since I'm not Steve Jobs, I don't have a turtleneck, I thought that a video would be the smoothest way of doing it. So with that, let me show you the video. I'm going to show you a tool called Iris iFile. This is one of many products that XBRL US members provide to allow filers to create inline XBRL documents. We're going to demonstrate with the county of Ogemaw, Michigan. So to get started, I click on this Iris iFile Excel tool icon, and it brings up a start screen. So then I enter the name of the government, Ogemaw County. Indicate the type of government. In this case, it's a county, and the state, which is Michigan. And then I give the fiscal start and end date. Now, this is the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2021, which means that it started October 1st of 2020. So 10/01/2020. And then the fiscal year end date of 09/30/2021. leave all the other variables intact, and then click on Generate Template. So now what's happening is an Excel spreadsheet is being created. I'll temporarily get this out of the way so you can see that. And this will have portions of an ACFR. This is not a full demo. We're just going to show a couple of the financial statements, but this tool has been used for much more ambitious documents than the one that we're going to be showing today. So you see we have a statement of net position set up, as well as a statement of activities and governmental fund balance sheet. Again, our taxonomy supports many, many more statements, and those could all be included in a production version of this software. So if I move to the statement of net position, you'll see right now that there are no columns set up. Looking at our financial statement in PDF format, going to page 15, where we have our statement of net position, you'll see we have governmental activities, business type activities, as well as component units. So if I say edit type of governmental unit, I then get this dialog, and it allows me to select one or all of these column types. In this case, all 4 of these apply. So I'll just select all here, click on apply. And you'll soon see the 4 columns come up. So if I click OK, you can now see governmental activities, business type activities, primary government activities, and finally the component unit. And then there are places in the Excel spreadsheet where I can enter information about the financial statistics of those 4. Let's take a look at the governmental fund balance sheet. So once again, here we don't have anything set up. If I move over the statement again and go to that page, you'll see that we have 5 columns, general fund, and so on. And of course, these are very variable. Other than general fund and total governmental funds, these can pretty much be anything. And the tool handles that level of variability. So let's take a look at that again. So we say edit fund identifier. This dialog comes up, and then I can say add. And here I can type general fund. And then I can add another. And in this case, it's the second one is Housing Commission Fund. And last but not least, total governmental funds. Click on save. And now the appropriate columns have been created. Now let's talk about entering the financial data into the spreadsheet. So I previously filled most of the statement of net position in just to save time. And what we're going to do now is just focus on a couple of variables and the deferred inflows of resources. So you can see that for pensions, we have 656,091. I can copy that. And then I look for the pension row in the template, which is based on the taxonomy that you saw earlier. And I can paste that right in. And then I pick up the amount for business type activities. Paste that. I'm going to skip total primary government, get back to that in a little while, and then just put in the component unit amount. So that's the pension items. Then we have the OPEB items. This is just for the component unit, 29,695. Copy that. OPEB items are up here. Paste that in. All right, so I'm now going to remove this and give us some more screen real estate here. And I'm going to bring the toolbox up. This is part of the Excel add-in that is provided with iFile. And before I skipped filling primary government activities, and that's because it's a total, and that total is actually handled by the taxonomy, which is represented in this tool. So if I click on Auto Calculate Domain Totals, you'll see that 738,154 has been filled in. and that is an accurate summation of these two values. So the only columns you have to fill in are ones that are not totals, and the same holds true of row totals as well. So you can see all of these have been calculated as well. So now, having put in the data, we're ready to generate the inline XBRL document, and that's again available from the toolbox here at the extreme right. So if I click on that and confirm, then the generation process starts. Once the file has been generated, it gives me an opportunity to save it in my documents folder. So I'm going to do that. And voila, it's been saved. So now if I bring up my Explorer and go back into documents, and here's the most recently created document, I then click on this version. This has the embedded viewing software in it. That'll then bring up an inline XBRL document using Iris's viewer. So you can see the statement in that position has been filled in. If we go all the way down towards the bottom, you can see that those numbers that we typed in earlier are there. So for example, if I click on this 656,091, that is a deferred inflow of resources for pensions, and it's associated with governmental activities. So this format looks a little different than the SEC viewer, but this file could also be converted into something that's SEC compatible. It's just what's generated with the product out of the box. So that gives you an idea of what you can do with iFile. It provides an Excel style interface because it uses Excel that lets you fill in the numbers, lets you generate the columns that you need, and then quickly generate the inline XBRL file, which you can then file with the appropriate authority or authorities when the time comes. Thank you for watching. Great. So Campbell, if you could take over and advance the slide, I can talk about data consumption. What happens once these XBRL or inline XBRL documents are displayed? So what really is going on here is when you're creating an inline XBRL document, you're simply creating a text file that has HTML tags in it, and it has inline XBRL tags. And that text file can be parsed, basically means being read by a machine. And so giving an example here of a Python script that I developed, and if anyone's interested, you can contact me later and I can show you that Python script. And it essentially takes the data that you saw in the inline viewer, and at the top right shows a simple spreadsheet that has some of the concepts. And you can see that the item name, for example, is cash and cash equivalents all run together because that's what it's called in the taxonomy. The amounts tie out. And we also show the instant, which means when this balance sheet was as of. In this case, it was as of September 30th, 2020. So with a fairly simple script, all of this data can be extracted from the inline XBRL document and arrayed into a spreadsheet. And of course, it doesn't just stop with a spreadsheet. You can also load the spreadsheet in, data or the CSV data that's been generated here into a relational database. So if you have tens of thousands of governments, along with many years of fiscal data, you can imagine having a very, very powerful data set that can be used to analyze and you do peer comparisons, do credit analysis, and so forth. One thing I just want to say in conclusion is, this is as reported data. And so I think one question that many people would have is, does this mean that there's no longer a role for people who are performing data aggregation? But companies that do data aggregation often do value added. They do steps to manually standardize the data. All this does is eliminates the grunt work of picking up numbers off of a PDF and then arraying them into some kind of database. The higher value added work of creating standardized data sets is still something that can be provided by the municipal financial industry. And with that, I'll turn it back to Michelle.
Great, Mark, thank you very much. I think that was a great video and demonstration. And we're going to move to some CPE questions now. So let me pull up the final two CPE questions. Okay, so here we are on the screen. Which of the following agencies currently require reporting in structured XBRL format? Is it the National Credit Union Administration, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or U.S. Treasury? Which of those three requires data to be reported in XBRL format? We'll just take about another 40 seconds here. Okay, I think we're going to close this poll down in a second here. Just for those of you wondering, the agency that does accept data in structured format today is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. So let's go to our last poll question. All right, which of the following statements about data standards is true? XML and CSV are examples of data standards. Data standards are accounting standards like those maintained by GASB or FASB. Or is it open data standards allow many options to report preparation because they can be freely adopted? Which of those statements is true? Okay, and I think we're going to close down this last poll question. And just for those of you wondering, the true statement is open data standards allow many options to report preparation because they can be freely adopted. So I'm going to end that poll. Thank you very much. And now we just have about 3 minutes to go to open Q&A. And I know we've taken a lot of questions already, but so if we want to just advance to the last slide here with everyone's name on the screen. We have received a lot of questions and I think that we've really answered most of them. But let me just toss out a couple of new questions that we received. Let's see. I think there was a question about different applications that may have been missing from the list of providers that you saw on the screen that Campbell was showing. I was just trying to get to give you a sense for the breadth of services that are out there, and the fact that there are services that are sort of high end and very inexpensive services as well. And one of the questions was about some of the software providers out there, like I think Tyler may have been one, and BSNA, which I believe is widely used in Michigan. And any existing ERP system or application can be adapted to the XBRL standard to generate XBRL formatted data because it is an open standard. There are no licensing fees associated with using it. They can just adapt to the freely available taxonomy. I don't know if Campbell, you want to add anything to that?
I think you covered it, Michelle.
Okay. Okay, then we also got a question, next steps. What are the recommendations on ways to stay involved and informed? Thank you for that question. I'm not sure who asked that, but Mark, do you want to address that? How to stay informed?
Yes, thanks for the question and thanks, Michelle, breaking me in. So if you're with the state or local government, please contact us if you're interested in conducting a pilot. We'd like to expand this program beyond Michigan and Florida, where there have been pilots previously. And so if you're in those states, or if you're in any of the other 48 states, or if you're in Puerto Rico, please reach out to us. Also, if you're a software company, an academic institution, or if you're with a firm that operates in the municipal bond market, and you'd like to have input into the taxonomy that you've briefly seen here and can look at xbrl.us, please consider joining our standard government reporting working group and contributing. And I know we're out of time, but just to really qualify things, this is our opinion about the best practices for implementation of this standard. The ultimate decision is going to be with the SEC. All that we can do is show the SEC a very strong pilot that can help inform their regulatory decisions. Back to you, Michelle.
That's a great point, Mark. Yes, I mean, we developed this very much independently of the FDTA. We started this back in 2018 because we saw this as a really good idea, a way of improving efficiencies. And the fact that the FDTA passed is, obviously we see this as good news, and we're happy to, have this taxonomy available for, potentially for use by the SEC, MSRB, and GASB. So with that, I think we have answered most of our questions. And if there are any that we have not yet responded to, we will come back and we'll review all the questions that we received. And to stay involved, just stay on our mailing list, certainly. And there will be future events and other, messaging and documentation coming out on this topic. Obviously, we see this as really important. And I want to thank so much Stephanie Leiser, Robert Whittigan, Campbell Pride, Mark Jaffe, for speaking on our event today. And I want to thank all of the application providers like Iris Business and Workiva, who contributed greatly to the work that we've been doing, and many other software providers and service providers, and also public sector specialists that have helped us promote the webinar and get the word out, and who kind of believe in this cause. So thanks very much, and we look forward to seeing you on future events.